The yellow box.
Good live.
Excellent.
Cool.
Thanks, Ben.
Hi. Welcome to the Geoffrey Miller channel. I'm Geoffrey, and this is my friend Justin Murphy. This is all very experimental. I don't really know what I'm doing at all. So we have a little setup. We have a wonky little studio, dinosaurs and owls, and a little house plant. Justin has done a lot more live streaming than I have, so he's kind of here partly to interview and discuss and partly for technical assistance. We're also aided by our helper Ben Williamson behind the computer. And what I'm thinking about for this channel is, I'm an evolutionary psychology professor, so there's going to be quite a bit of evolution and sexuality and science, but there's also going to be contemporary culture, politics, the kind of stuff I follow on my Twitter feed, Primal Poly, and my eccentric little interests, science fiction and woodworking and stuff I'm reading, stuff I'm watching, whatever strikes my fancy. So I'm not going to particularly try to stay on topic or on brand in terms of having any particular thing that I'm restricted to. It'll just be me as a person. That's my channel. And I think Justin is also kind of a master of doing that. Just whatever catches his attention is what he talks about. That's the general idea, and I'm going to try to integrate this channel as much as I can with, my Twitter feed. I'm pretty active on Twitter, a little bit less so on Facebook. I'm also on Goodreads and LinkedIn and some of those other social media channels that people don't seem to use a whole lot. So we're also going to try to roll this into some ebooks I'm working on that'll roll out soon, and eventually I hope a book from a mainstream publisher that'll be my 5th book or so, but that won't be out for a couple of years. So I welcome your chat, your feedback, your questions, and do you want to dive into sort of some of the backstory?
Yeah, sure.
To this.
So my wife and I moved here into Geoffrey's house. we got here I think it was about 9 or 10 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
And as Geoffrey said, we don't really know what we're doing exactly. But I think the one thing that Geoffrey and I have in common that we both feel very strongly about is academics and public highbrow intellectuals don't do enough of this kind of stuff. And there's only really one way to figure out how to use these different interfaces and media. And that's just by jumping in and playing around with it. And, Geoffrey very kindly said in his introduction that, I know what I'm doing, or I've been doing this for a while. But I mean, I just started playing with the internet in a serious way, as a serious way to really kind of communicate my ideas about a year ago. And I still feel like I'm just still experimenting. The internet is such a strange world today. And there are all these new opportunities and places and times where you can build your ideas and have conversations and communicate all different types of things. And I still am just playing around, I feel like. And I think that's a good spirit. So we're just basically trying to do that together now.
Yeah, this is all just a kind of goofy, low budget experiment. And, if it succeeds, maybe we'll kind of level up in terms of production quality and background and all of that. But for the moment, we thought, the way to start something is just to start it. Not to overthink it. And I think we both have that kind of just pragmatic, go ahead and try it, see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing I think we have in common, and also I should say your fiance, Diana Fleischman, and to some degree, my wife even also, although she's not as active on the internet as we all are. One thing that we kind of all have in common is that we think a lot, right? And we have a lot of ideas, and we don't have as many opportunities as we would like to deposit those ideas or to cultivate them or to develop them in public. And so we're just we have a kind of shared desire to do that more, to reach at whatever's at hand, to basically just create our own platforms. And I'd say we're also very interested in kind of the financial sustainability and the kind of new models for, I would say this is kind of my angle personally, because you're a working academic. People who have been following my channel for some time will know that I was an academic for almost 6 years, and it was cool. It was good. I was, successful, and I liked a lot of things about it. But ultimately, as someone at a different stage in my career, I'm quite young, and I'm looking forward to kind of the future of my intellectual career. I'm not even yet in my prime. I had this kind of strong feeling as an academic that like that way of doing it just was, I was selling myself short, that I just wasn't going to be able to think the greatest ideas I could at the greatest volume I could in the most kind of significant, free, impactful way that I could. I just always had this really strong hunch that this academic system I was playing in just wasn't the best way, and it was really frustrating. And so I left academia. I wouldn't say like to do all of this stuff full time, but kind of. I mean, I wouldn't like bet the farm on like being a YouTube star or something like that. It's not anything so naive as that, but it's basically for me, and this is kind of where you and I are a little bit different because you're still an academic. For me, I really kind of took a plunge, and I was basically like, I have my blog, has a fair amount of readers. I have my YouTube channel, has a fair amount of viewers. Even if it doesn't grow or go anywhere else, it's all enough that actually I'd rather just do all of my intellectual work completely independently. And I'll spend the next 6 months or the next year seeing what happens if I do this full time, just because it seemed like a good wager. And so that's where I'm at. But you're still an academic, so we have different kind of strategies. But one thing that we are both interested in is disintermediated marketplaces, right? The ability for individuals, for smart, clever individuals with, willpower and initiative to publish their own books and possibly do quite well for themselves, selling them different forms of monetization that various kinds of independent intellectuals are pursuing today. We're both, we pay attention to these things and we're interested in exploring them from somewhat different angles. But so ebooks would be one.
If you look at all this in historical perspective, the idea that thinkers, scientists, intellectuals would promote their ideas mainly through academic outlets is a fairly recent thing, right? That was the game for about 100 years. You teach undergrads, you mentor graduate students, you publish journal articles. Sometimes you do like a popular science trade book. That was kind of the model for most of the 20th century. But before the 20th century, if you had ideas, you were just in a little network of intellectuals, and you had salons, you had letters, you had public lectures. And, back in Darwin's era, a lot of scientists were either, independent gentlemen of means, or like Thomas Henry Huxley, they supported themselves by talking directly to the people in large public lectures. So I guess we're kind of trying to revive that model in a way, but with the leverage that you can get from digital outreach. So what we're planning to do, I think, is kind of a combination of me doing little pieces where I just talk to camera about some topic that would typically be recorded videos. We'll maybe do some live streams where it's me and Justin, or me and my fiance, Diana Fleischman, who's also an evolutionary psychology professor. We'll probably get some local academics, thinkers, scholars to visit here in our little studio in my house, and I'll kind of interview them, or we'll have discussions about things. We'll do some Skype interviews with distant folks who sort of fit my interests somehow, and maybe some more experimental stuff that's just, maybe we'll be hanging around in my living room and talking, and maybe we'll just live stream it if we get inspired and think it might be valuable to people. So that's kind of the structure of what we're planning to do. We have a question from Benjamin Boyce about what areas are we going to cover.
I did a live stream with Benjamin Boyce once. Okay. He's a fairly popular YouTuber in kind of our spaces. Cool. So what's up, Ben? Good to see you here.
And so, I mean, my books and teaching and writing have kind of focused on the origins of human nature, evolutionary psychology, human sexuality. Our editor here, Ben, actually took my Psychology of Human Sexuality class and my Psychology of Effective Altruism class. There's going to be some effective altruism stuff that'll range from kind of effective charities to animal rights to existential risks and how to minimize them, which is one of my big passions at the moment. There will be probably a lot of analysis of kind of contemporary culture, books, movies, TV series through a kind of Darwinian lens in terms of how can we understand, what's happening in culture or just between characters from that point of view. There's probably going to be a fair amount of politics, and I think both Justin and I are weird political animals because we're kind of hard to categorize. I think of myself as kind of centrism adjacent. Like in some ways, I'm extremely radically left. Like I'm very sex positive, I'm polyamorous and an open relationship, pro drug legalization, a lot of leftist stuff like that. On the other hand, I'm quite traditionalist and conservative in some other domains. And I'm kind of centrist and undecided about stuff I don't really know about. So I think it's important, particularly in an era of partisan polarization in America, for people who are kind of complicated centrists to reach out and connect with each other and to kind of remind people it's not all about sort of conventional politics as you see on Twitter. So those are, oh, I also work a lot on art and aesthetics, and my Twitter feed's kind of artsy. There's always little paintings and landscapes and portraits and stuff, so there might be some artsy stuff. And my personal little passions, however they develop. So that's going to be kind of the heart of the content, but I reserve the right to change and to go off in whatever directions capture my interest.
Aren't we all weird political animals these days?
I hope so. I mean, the people who think, don't necessarily look at any existing political figure or party and think, yes, that perfectly represents what I believe. That's pretty rare these days. And of course, it should be. Why would any particular politician fit your beliefs? But I think mainstream media tends to suppress unusual views and people who aren't, anybody where you can't predict their view on topic X from their view on topic Y tends to kind of get shut out of public discourse because it's very confusing to mainstream media and to politics as usual.
So one of the things that we've been talking a lot about lately is sort of independent monetization processes and options and the new models that people are experimenting with. And ebooks is something that you and I both have recently converged on wanting to do. So in the past couple days, actually, we both have come up with little ebook projects that we're kind of independently launching. I've been tweeting plenty about mine, and I talked plenty about mine in my live stream yesterday, but maybe you want to tell them a little bit about your ebook that will be out soon.
Yeah, so I'm working on a book proposal for a book about sort of polyamory and the future of American families, the future of long-term relationships. But that won't be out for a long time. I would love to get some content out faster than that. And I was just looking over my CV the other day, kind of updating it, and realized I've actually published about 50 short essays over the last 25 years on various outlets, like edge.org, John Brockman's Edge website, and lots of others. And they're not really compiled anywhere. They're kind of hard to find, and they're not organized thematically. So I thought, why not just do a quick and dirty self-published ebook that kind of puts together maybe 8 or 10 of these essays that are topically related, put it out there, charge not very much money, and just have it available to people. So that's what I've been working on this week. And my hope is that we can actually release at least one or maybe more of those ebooks, maybe within about a month. I'll need a little technical help from Justin and others to make it work. But
I got you.
For someone where my first 4 books were like, you spend 2 years writing it and you turn in your manuscript, and then it's a year with the publisher before they release hardback, and then another year before paperback. The idea of being able to turn around content really, really quickly is exciting to me.
Yeah.
So we're going to aim for that.
Yeah.
And Justin's ebook is going to be.
Yeah. Well, I won't occupy your channel with too much discussion of mine. If people are interested in my little ebook project I'm working on right now, you can check out my live stream that I did yesterday. I talked about it at length. But I think you just kind of hit the nail on the head about what I'm kind of most interested in is just, I'm so sick and tired of asking for permission and for waiting on other people and institutions that honestly offer us less and less. I mean, you and I have very different attitudes towards these things, not too different, but significantly different because we're at different stages in our career. You've had a certain track record for yourself in previous years with mainstream published books. And I have no disrespect for any of that at all. If that's the path people go down and it works for them, by all means. But it just seems to me that if you're young and you're able and you have a lot to say and you have multiple books inside of you to be written, that more and more the incentives for playing the waiting game and the asking permission game to get some publisher to endorse you, the costs of that are increasingly high. The opportunity costs are increasingly high, and the unique benefits you get from that seem to be decreasing also. Because if you just have the hustle and you just get after it and you do exactly what you want to do on the internet and you just go straight to the people that are reading your stuff, my sense is that the tide is really turning. And I think from here on out, you're going to see more and more young people who are able, just saying that they don't feel like playing the waiting game, the institutional ask for permission game. And I think that we're really probably, my wager is that we're on the cusp of a significant kind of sea change on that. And I'm putting my money where my mouth is, because I played that waiting game for a long time. I was very patient. I did all of the things I was supposed to do, and even was quite successful. Like I had an agent. I have an agent actually at the moment, technically. And it's all been fine, but it's just too slow. I'm sick of waiting. And I think the damage I can do, the impact I can have on the culture is just much greater if I just get to it right now. Like I could probably do at least 2 books, like at least 1 short book and 1 longer book a year, probably, if that was all you did, and you weren't doing proposals, you weren't asking anyone, you weren't, I just have this like vision that so much more could be done. And I'm trying to kind of put my money where my mouth is, and in part to show younger people. Like I get a lot of emails from young people saying like, oh, I really want to like write a book, but I don't know how, or I have to go to grad school first, or these sorts of anxieties. And I just really want to kind of like use my life as an example to be like, no, fuck it, just work hard, do it now, like get after it. You'll get better as you go. And just I think the time is now for people to be more radical on that front.
Yeah, I mean, look, when I guess I got my first book deal for the Mating Mind book. It came out in 2000, but I got the deal in like 96 or so. In that era, right, a mainstream publisher would cultivate a new author.
Mm-hmm.
They would really do some marketing and publicity and outreach and arrange interviews and do a good job of kind of getting, excerpts from the book placed in New York Times or whatever. And they actually worked for the share of the revenue from the book. These days, publishers will typically say, look, we will only give you a book deal if you already have a big platform on social media, a lot of followers, a lot of fans. You have to have this many Twitter followers, you have to have your YouTube channel, blah, blah, blah. And this is really frustrating because you end up, working with mainstream publishers, but they take the lion's share of the revenue from your books. So, and they exert quite a bit of editorial control over what you're allowed to say. So in that kind of context, you start wondering, well, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
And just to echo what Justin said, a lot of young people think, okay, to have any credibility in the ideas market, I need to go get my PhD. I need to get the credentials. I need to get the tenure track job and then the tenure and all of that before I'm allowed to say what I really think. No, you really don't.
Right.
I mean, that's an old model. And I see a lot of young people, Gen Z, millennials, just getting their ideas out there immediately. Like my friend Coleman Hughes, who writes for Colette, right? He's still an undergrad at Columbia, but he's writing amazing articles, even testified before Congress last week. And so you don't have to wait. You can publish your ideas. Maybe they get traction, maybe they don't. But yeah, it's a mindset of not having to ask for permission from the powers that be. Now, there's a couple interesting chat questions about, well, what do we do about the rising tide of censorship across Silicon Valley, and the fact that, okay, YouTube is controlled by Google, and Google has a certain political agenda, which is very clear, increasingly clear. There's a risk of censorship and demonetization and all of that. The demonetization sounds like a pretty obscure issue, but what it really means is if you can make it impossible for independent thinkers to earn a living by doing independent thinking, then you eliminate independent thinking. So it's actually a really big ethical issue. If you demonetize everybody's content that doesn't fit the mainstream narrative, then you're basically saying, if you're not gainfully employed already, right? And just sharing your ideas as a kind of hobby on evenings and weekends, then, you're not legit. We're not going to allow you to have that lifestyle. So we're still kind of struggling to anticipate what is the future of censorship and political bias in the online arena. But what we hope is that, like all else being equal, it'll be a bit less biased than mainstream book publishing, a bit less biased than mainstream media and news and so forth. Now, of course, there might be certain topics that we might kind of shy away from that are going to be automatic red flags that would get you kicked off the platform. Not that I necessarily, would want to talk about those, but we're very well aware of what those are. And so you kind of have to make some concessions potentially. You're less inclined to do that maybe than me, but we're going to be as honest and edgy and radical and outspoken as we think we can be. And sometimes we'll probably overstep and we might get some blowback. And sometimes you guys hopefully will say, like, say more about that. We want to hear more about that in chat. And then we'll push the envelope a little bit more actively.
I think it's a good question, and it is a problem, basically the kind of algorithmic censorship that is going on across the large platforms. But honestly, I think a lot of people get bogged down in it. I would tell people to not think too much about it. The overwhelmingly more important thing is to focus on having something important to say, especially for young people. People think like, oh, well, even YouTube is repressive because I might not get monetized and there's all this censorship. Well, for most people, especially people in kind of the first half of their life, you shouldn't really be that concerned about that. You should be focusing on having something to say and cultivating the practices of writing and speaking and actually getting them across. I mean, you should be so lucky to be censored. I mean that's quite a far off problem. There are many platforms, and sure, maybe the YouTube algorithm isn't treating you very well. That sucks. Maybe you get demonetized on YouTube, but still, the overwhelming fact of contemporary social reality is that you have tons of options for getting your ideas out there, and you really shouldn't be whining about like a particular platform maybe not treating you well. And I mean, I've been there. I get it, and it could happen to me. But you should price that in. You should already be factoring that in. And ultimately, I actually think it's a kind of a good thing. The more faulty the algorithms are on a system like YouTube, the more it just incentivizes people to create more censorship-proof systems. In particular, I imagine blockchain systems to be coming out in the not too distant future, where the idea of a platform censoring videos or deciding which one gets more views or whatever, I suspect that in the not too distant future, that is going to be more or less kind of removed from contemporary technological platforms, just because of, I mean, just look at the popular backlash against YouTube. I mean, it's a major problem. As soon as the problem can be solved by another platform that can have a better algorithm that makes more sense for people and kind of improves net welfare or whatever across the board, it's gonna come around. So I mean, the way I think about it is to just not get too invested in any particular platform. Especially if you're interested in radical ideas of any kind, you should basically just assume the worst. Assume there'll come a time where you get kicked off YouTube. Assume there's going to come a time where you get kicked off Twitter or you're shadow banned on Twitter. Just assume all those things and focus on having something to say. Focus on doing the work and posting it wherever you can. There are always going to be many options. So I think people kind of overhype it a bit.
Yeah. So there's a question from Brad Barnes about a particularly big problem, of course, is people who have jobs they need to like support themselves, their family, their babies, pay the mortgage, etc., and where their employer is potentially a point of leverage for social justice mobs, outrage mobs, cancel culture. Right?
Yeah, I could tell you about that.
I totally understand that danger myself, and I know other people who understand that danger. The SJWs, of course, understand exactly how to put pressure on employers for people who don't toe the line in terms of mainstream thinking. For those people, it can be really, really tough. And I kind of have the luxury of having tenure as a professor. I've been tenured for 10 years. It does not totally insulate me from academic pressure, but it provides quite a bit more security than most people have. And I understand exactly how horrifying it would be if you don't have that level of job security and you're going online, you're sharing edgy ideas or even ideas that shouldn't be edgy. They're just like, here's what mainstream science says about some issue. Oh, it doesn't fit with what people on the far left or the far right say about the issue. Therefore, you're vulnerable. I have no solution to that. If I think of one, I'll do a video on it and let you know. And just, YouTube does get a lot of flack, but I'm doing this channel partly because I love YouTube. I love the fact that you can go on and see people of all ages just pursuing their passions, whatever they are, like the woodworking videos and the ASMR videos and the political commentary videos, and like, here's what really happened in Avengers Infinity War, any of that. I love it. It's an astonishing resource and platform. And I think it's great that people feel empowered to take their unique little viewpoint and passions and put them out there to the world. And generally speaking, apart from the realm of politics and a few other touchy areas, people seem to get along pretty well. And it's kind of a positive platform, and people give each other, a lot of nice feedback. And so this is not going to be, my channel's not going to be dominated by edgy content. It'll just get into that stuff to the extent that I personally, care about it. But a lot of it will be, I hope, relatively uncontroversial and remain monetized.
Something we were also talking about before is how we both would like to kind of put a little bit of friendly pressure on other academics to do this kind of stuff. Yeah. We kind of are trying to put our money where our mouth is, and kind of, I don't know, through our own example or through our own experiments with this sort of stuff, we're kind of trying to say to other academics, there's really not much of a reason not to be doing this. And in fact, a lot of bad academic work kind of hides under its absolute inability to communicate in this kind of way, And so I think, I don't see my experiments with the internet as a major kind of social crusade in any particular way, but there's a little bit of an angle in which I like doing this stuff because I like the message it sends to other academics. If you're an intellectual, if you think you know a lot of things, if you think you have important research that you're doing, if you think you know things that other people don't know, well, then why aren't you on these free, immediately available platforms sharing your insight with the world? The answer to that question for some academics is because actually they're hiding in dubious academic cartels where they're actually not even making much sense to each other. Yeah. And they know damn well that that's what they're doing. And what I like about the cleavage that's opening up among academics and intellectuals between those who go all in on the internet and they communicate, they'll answer any question anyone has, and there's nothing to hide, and they love talking about ideas, and their expertise merges with their free-flowing casual conversation with the public. There's that type of academic who I think is more likely to be what I would call the real deal. They're authentic intellectuals. And then there's the other academic who, if they had to try to express what's interesting or valuable about their expertise to a popular audience, they would just be utterly dumbfounded. Yeah. And I like kind of drawing attention to that. I like kind of polarizing that cleavage a little bit, because I think there's a lot that's rotten hiding in academia. And this is kind of, in our own little micro political way, putting a little bit of pressure on that I think is healthy, I think.
Yeah. So Konstantinos is asking, what's your take on peer review and old academic standards? This is kind of a related issue. Is the publishing model you're describing an alternative to old-fashioned academia, or just another way of being out there? I think it's both. It depends on what your goals are. Like, if you really want to become an academic as a career path, it's really hard. You're pretty unlikely to succeed. It requires enormous amounts of work through your 20s and 30s until you get tenure. Some people can do it, particularly if they're working in controversial areas. But I think Justin's right. It hides a lot of mediocrity. I sometimes have these fantasies of like, I wish there were about 1,000 copies of Joe Rogan and they could interview all the academics out there, right? And the academics would like try to explain their little research findings. And Joe would be like, what the fuck are you talking about? What do you mean by that? Be clear, explain it better. And I think that kind of interaction can be really useful for developing your ideas. I mean, before I published Mating Mind 20 years ago, I'd given about 50 talks to all different kinds of audiences about the ideas, popular audiences, academic audiences, different fields. And it really helped me sort of develop the thoughts, and some of them I jettisoned and I was like, that's not going to work. And others, I thought, yeah, this is solid. But a lot of academics are terrified of exposing fairly fragile ideas that only make sense in a certain little context to the general public or to other fields or to YouTube viewers. And I think that makes the science weak. I think it makes the scholarship weak. And I've always felt like if I couldn't explain what I'm working on to some random person sitting next to me on an airplane, it's probably not very important. There's exceptions like particle physics, right? Hard to explain. But anything to do with human behavior, probably you should be able to explain it to your, your grandparents or your neighbor and have it make sense.
Well, Pseudo Poster thinks this is based, so thank you. Based. Very based. What else we got? I really applaud you guys for embracing and rediscovering the role of public intellectuals in society. The mainstream media is an intellectual wasteland of vacuous nothingness.
Yeah.
Well, I assure you, I can occasionally be a wasteland of vacuous nothingness also, so don't get your hopes up too much. But yeah, we're trying. I mean, yeah, it's not ultimately about us. Like, we're just two, hopefully, fairly smart, interesting people who have our own ideas. But I think really the game changer is the culture, like what's happening in the culture. That's just absolutely momentous. And frankly, I mean, a lot of academics don't even understand. I think that a lot of academics honestly don't understand what's going on right now with just the way in which intellectual life in our society is migrating to all of these strange internet pockets.
Yeah.
The degree to which that migration has already occurred and is probably irreversible. The average academic literally doesn't understand. They assume that as academics, their position and their academic journal articles are still pretty much the cream of the crop. And yes, academics know that normal people generally don't read published academic research, but they still imagine themselves as occupying the center or the top of the pyramid of a kind of social hierarchy of intellectual influence. And it's simply wrong. And that's like one of the craziest things I've really come to understand deeply over the past year or two as I've been doing the internet stuff more. And this is ultimately one of the reasons why I decided to take the plunge away from academia just to do this stuff full time as my main intellectual media, is because I really saw how deeply, like, holy shit, I really thought that I was still the shit for being an academic, that I had this kind of like natural cultural capital that the rest of society would implicitly respect. And then I realized like how much actually normal people mistrust academics more than ever, especially if you're conservative. The data bears that out. And two, people actually don't care that much about credentials and fancy academic accomplishments. If you make like philosophy videos on YouTube and people judge them to be high quality and interesting and useful, people are going to respect you more than they respect an average academic. And so there's a kind of breakdown, I think, of like traditional prestige canals, like the social respect that is commanded by traditional prestige pathways. It appears to me that it's just absolutely disintegrating. I don't know if you've observed that or if you disagree or what.
Well, I think it's important for the general public to understand how little incentive there is for academics to reach out to the public. So Patrick's asking, is the university model outdated, and don't most academic theories trickle down like to the public eventually somehow? I don't think they do, because here's what literally happens if you're applying for an academic job or you're trying to get promotion and tenure as an assistant professor. You get a score for your service, right? Which includes what do you contribute to department, like committee work, what do you contribute to your university, more committee work, what do you contribute to the general public. What counts is things like, and I'm literally not making this up, this is what they count. Have you been a judge in a local science competition, right? Have you given a speech to a local club and done a little bit of outreach? If you have 70,000 Twitter followers like me, or you have a YouTube channel, or you go on Joe Rogan, it counts for literally nothing. It buys you nothing. And so what you have is quantitatively this weird double standard. If you publish a journal article and it gets cited about 10 times a year, that's considered pretty good. That means about 4 people have read it per year. If you publish an academic book, what will happen is it gets bought by about 300 individuals and about 3,000 university libraries. That's considered pretty good. If you publish even a mainstream nonfiction science book, good sales over a multi-year period for a nonfiction book are about 20 to 30,000 copies, right? Now, if you go on Dave Rubin and only 20,000 people watch your video, that's a disastrously bad Dave Rubin performance. So, what it takes an academic to count as having influence within academia is sort of like this much. But what you can actually do if you do effective digital public outreach is like this much. But academia don't care. Your colleagues don't care unless they understand the new game.
Right. So we have 2 questions that are more or less the same. So I guess it's a hot interest about basically asking what are the alternatives to academia? What are alternative paths? And I mean, what I tell people is, although most of the people who know my work and kind of my talking points know that I've become, not a fan of academia. And I think for a lot of people, it's a losing wager. I would never turn someone off from doing academia if that's what they want to do. I'd say it's if you want to be a professor or you want that kind of traditional academic life as you've come to see it, there's nothing wrong with trying your luck. I think in particular, like doing a PhD, for instance, in America, where you're most likely to get a stipend. I mean, as long as it's paid and you're not paying for it, and especially if you get a stipend, doing a PhD is a very decent way to waste your 20s by all means. I mean, even if it doesn't amount to a job, I loved it. I loved doing a PhD. I absolutely loved it. I would not take that back. If I could go back, I would not have done it any differently. I loved it. Even if I was lucky to get a tenure track job and to succeed moving forward, but that was luck. That's a lottery, really. I was good, but it's mostly luck. And so even had I not gone into academia, it still would have been worth it because I significantly increased my abilities and knowledge in that PhD program. So I say if you really want to live a long-term intellectual life, there's nothing wrong with doing a PhD, at least as long as you can get it paid for. And most programs in America will give you that if you get in. But I think, like when I came up in my PhD, everyone knew basically that your chances of getting a good career out of this are very slim. And yet everyone was still just kind of doing their best and hoping to win the lottery. And that's a very depressing kind of environment.
Yeah.
What I now tell people when they ask me for advice on, like young people, undergrads, whatever, when people ask me for advice on this, what I now say is, now you have all these other platforms to hedge your bets, basically. So what I would do personally, if I was doing my PhD now, I would do my best to play the academic game or whatever. I would do my work and be responsible about it. Try to get my lottery ticket into an academic job if that's what you want. But also you can keep a blog and you can put a fair amount of time into a blog and you can do YouTube videos. Like a lot of the good YouTube video people are PhD students, actually. Like the distributist, who some of you might know, he's kind of adjacent to some of these discussions. He's a Catholic guy, conservative guy. He's a PhD student and has a quite a successful growing channel. A lot of people are kind of doing both at the same time. And I mean, doing stuff like the online platforms can actually be a problem in academia. It does to traditional academics. It does kind of send a signal that you might not be that serious. Like academia does actually, to really succeed in academia and to increase to maximize the probability that you get that lottery ticket to a tenure track job, you really need to kind of show your future, employers or the people you're going to be applying to. You need to show them that you're absolutely obsessed with academia and nothing else whatsoever, and that you would never waste any time doing YouTube. So there is a bit of a trade-off. But you can manage it. Like when I was in grad school, I used a pseudonym, and I had like a very active blog, and I was very active. I was very creative in grad school, and I did some pretty crazy shit too. Like I've always been like pretty like I guess loose cannon or whatever. But I did it all under the pseudonym Barclay Shields. So if you Google now, you'll find tons of shit that Barclay Shields did, but it didn't stop me from getting a job. So I think more and more moving forward, there's nothing wrong with trying for an academic career if that's what you want. Personally, I think like less and less people should even bother trying personally, but I would never turn you off from it if that's something that you're passionate about. I would just say do the stuff on the side and hedge your bets. Do a kind of dual strategy.
I think the crucial thing is to be brutally honest with yourself about the chances of succeeding, if you do the academic route. So, for example, a typical job offer, a job advertisement that we have here at University of New Mexico, we might get like 100 applicants for each job, out of which maybe like 50 are fully qualified and like 20 are highly qualified. So you're competing against people who've also slogged their guts out and worked really hard throughout their 20s. And typically, they're not even going to be able to get an academic position straight out of a PhD. I spent literally 9 years in postdoc limbo before I got a tenure track job after graduating from Stanford with a pretty good record. Partly that was due to evolutionary psychology being taboo and there being a lot of ideological bias against it. But it's not an uncommon experience. So let's see, Adam was asking, should you go for the signaling value of the PhD, or is the opportunity cost too high? The opportunity cost is massive.
And increasing, I would say, with all these other opportunities.
Yeah, if an American PhD typically is going to take 5 or 6 years of your peak, fluid intelligence and peak potential intellectual productivity. And a lot of it's going to be spent doing stuff that's not actually that relevant to your intellectual development. It'll be serving as a teaching assistant in courses that are kind of boring, or helping your mentor or your lab mates do research maybe you're not that interested in. So it's a big opportunity cost. Everything Peter Thiel said against college, as a credential, you can kind of amplify that maybe 5-fold for graduate school. Not that it's wrong for everybody. It can be enormously fun. It's a relatively cheap way to spend your time. You get to hang out with really smart people if you get into a good program. You can certainly learn lots of empirical skills, but
not a bad way to get mate also.
And right. And, my research is all about like the point of the credential is not just to make money. In fact, the point of making money is often just get social status and get a good mate. So in terms of the mating market, it can be great for that.
One thing I would add, though, is that I think we have to face the fact that the signaling value of that PhD is decreasing.
Yes.
People, I think, underestimate the real significance of these recent scandals, like the recent hoax of the humanities journals. And I mean, and Twitter, users like the new real peer review, is that what it is? There is coming to light now a whole lot of information that was always quite hidden about like actually what a lot of PhD holders are like, and so, it's like, so long as all the PhDs of quite varied quality, let's be frank, as long as all the PhDs of varied quality could kind of hide and be relatively opaque to the public, the public could kind of trust, a PhD means like you're really freaking smart and you're really hardworking and you're a serious intellectual. But as these types of hoaxes and scandals and, as these things leak and enter into public consciousness, it inevitably must decrease the signaling value. So that's something to keep in mind. Like if you're making calculations for the future, you have to wonder how much is having a PhD going to really mean to people moving forward, as people kind of see how much is really hidden under this like PhD community that we live in.
I mean, there's PhDs and then there's PhDs. If you have a PhD in physics from MIT, that really still means something, right? That really testifies to like your minimum IQ level is this, and you're very conscientious, dedicated. You're capable of extremely abstract thought. You get a PhD in German literature or something from kind of mid-range school. That doesn't really mean a whole lot other than that you mastered a set of kind of canonical, like postmodernist critical theorists, and you're able to apply it to some arcane little area of whatever German culture. So it's night and day in terms of the signaling value. And I think there's increasing skepticism by the public and by employers towards PhDs that are in the softer fields.
Yeah, I would just say one quick thing. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but there's one additional point that I think is really important. If you can't tell, I get asked this stuff a lot, so I have a lot of thoughts on it. The question about whether or not you should do a PhD is, I think, hugely temperamental. It depends on your personality type and what it is you're trying to do. So what I would say is if all you want to do is increase the probability of having a good paying job one day, increase the probability of having a good mate, or a mate that you see as good, and you want to basically just as a general life improvement, improving your life chances type of thing to do. If you don't know what else to do, if you're in your 20s, you don't know what else to do, and you just basically want to, gain some confidence, you want to learn a lot about a topic, you want to maybe get a lottery ticket to a job, but you want to generally improve your life chances all around, then it's certainly not a bad choice. But if what you want is to be an intellectual at the highest level you're able to now and forever, and you want to live if you're enthusiastic to actually be conducting free inquiry, then that's a whole different question. And I would say there's nothing wrong if what you want is just a secure income and some decent status. If what you want is income and status, a PhD is a pretty good thing to do. But if what you want is a true radical intellectual life, then I have to really be honest and say more and more people should just recognize that a PhD is not that. It's not going to give you that, and all of these other opportunities are I think increasingly more promising, because you can start now and there's unlimited upside. And sure, it's still a kind of lottery. Is your blog going to blow up? Is your YouTube channel going to blow up? Yeah, it's still a bit of a lottery. Nothing's guaranteed, but you can start right now. You can work as hard as you want on exactly what you want, and you'll rise to the level of what you're capable of without having to ask anyone permission. So if a passionate intellectual life is what you want and a high enthusiasm kind of free intellectual life, then I would say do not do a PhD for that reason.
Yeah. And of course, it's very field dependent. So if you want to do a PhD in pharmacology, as one of the people on chat asked, that's going to be lab work. It's going to be very technical.
Good point.
You're going to contribute to science only if you're in a group with other people who have the equipment and skills to do it right. You're not going to do a whole lot in your basement by yourself. If you're doing any of the hard sciences, it's largely likewise. If you're in the behavioral sciences, there's kind of an interesting situation we're in right now where, if you're in a kind of a mainstream psychology department like me, and you run a study with a few hundred people, that's a decent sized study. That's pretty good. If you were at Google or Facebook or any of the data mining operations, even Pornhub, your sample sizes are typically going to be hundreds of thousands or millions. So if all you really want to do is understand human behavior, like consumer psychology and preferences and all of that, it might actually be better to go into big data and then work for one of those companies that actually has big data, or even government like the Census Bureau, rather than collect your own data and try to analyze it. This is an area where we are absolutely swamped in data, and it makes sense to go where the data lives, and that's not necessarily in academic behavioral sciences.
So my buddy Andrew, who I see in the chat here, really wants to know your take on neo-reaction. Do you feel like talking about that?
Well, I'll tell you what, Andrew. Justin kind of introduced me to neo-reaction, and you were pretty instrumental in me reading Moldbug and some of the other thinkers. What we should probably do is a standalone video.
Yeah, we can do that later.
Where we talk about that. So maybe we could aim to do that in the next couple of weeks or so. You probably know a little more about it than I do, perhaps, but I think it's a really interesting movement. It changed my views about certain things. It made me quite a bit more of a traditionalist about a lot of issues, particularly pronatalism, family values, and the kind of social functions of religion. So that's all I have to say about that so far.
There's a point here I want to address real quick. Someone says, abstract core philosophy says intellectuals should at least do a master's. I would take issue with that. A PhD makes sense because you can usually get it paid for, but a lot of the master's programs are scams, straight up. You generally have to pay for them yourselves, and it often doesn't really increase your life chances very much. And they're usually short, and the intellectual experience is usually, it can be good. I don't want to overgeneralize, but my advice would actually be the opposite. Either you do a PhD that's paid for and you get a stipend, or don't do a master's. Because the master's, I don't know how much you want to talk about. Geoffrey's an actual working professor, so I don't want to put him in the hot seat. But as someone I no longer have a horse in that race, and I'll tell you that, but behind closed doors, most professors have very uneasy emotions about the master's programs at their universities. At most universities, there's a lot of wink wink behind the scenes by administrators who know damn well that actually master's programs are cash cows that deliver very little value to students. I'm not speaking for any one university in particular, but this is a kind of open secret that I think is really shameful, to be frank. So I would generally, I would discourage anyone from doing a master's just because they feel like they have to have an advanced degree to be seen as smart or to be capable. A lot of the masters are actually some of the worst choices you can make. If you can get a PhD paid for, what do you have to lose? You're going to get a lot of education, and you even get a little bit of a payment each month with a stipend. It's the master's programs that actually I would avoid like the plague, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, if you're getting a master's in engineering, that can often be a great idea.
Yeah.
Like you can
Important
immediately
caveat.
start 6-figure income. Awesome. But like my department doesn't even give a master's degree in psychology. You have to apply to the PhD, and we don't have any of this like runaway credentialism where everybody thinks, oh, well, 25 years ago, a college degree was good enough. But now for this particular job track, everybody has to have a master's. You see this in public education, for example. Oh, I can't become like an assistant principal in a middle school without a master's degree in educational psychology. Those are the bullshit degrees, because you actually go through a school of ed and kind of end up knowing less about how education actually works than before you started. So that's my little rant about schools of ed. Some recommended reading for each episode. I'll see if I can add a little bit. Sure, absolutely. And I think should we try to wrap it up?
How long have we been going?
50 minutes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hour's about a good, healthy time. So I think we covered a lot of ground. This is good. Oh, so you have to, for those of you who weren't here at the beginning, the reason I'm here, by the way, is because Geoffrey's kind of new to this weird live streaming world, and I've been doing it for some time. So I'm kind of here to just help Geoffrey get off the ground. So one of the things you always have to do, you don't want to do it too much to the point you're being annoying, but you do have to do it, is you have to tell people, please subscribe, because if you don't remind them, then they won't. And basically the algorithm is such that they're not going to get notifications of your videos or going live unless they both subscribe and ideally hit the bell after the subscription. It's basically like you have to do it if you really want to be able to follow your content. People have to do that. So it's not really being spammy or anything. There's a reason why YouTubers always remind their listeners and watchers.
So the alternative way to do it is to say, thank you for subscribing.
Yes, there you go.
And thank you for hitting the bell rather than making the ask.
Could do it that way, yeah.
But yeah, I'm making the ask by saying thank you for subscribing.
There you go. There you go.
And yeah, but seriously, thanks you all for watching, and it's been fun for us. And we'll probably be back, I don't know, a few days, almost certainly within a week. I'll do another live stream on something.
Yep, my channel, his channel, maybe some new channels, who knows. We'll be experimenting with a bunch of things, but definitely fresh stuff on a weekly basis, I think is something you can absolutely expect. So I would say just, look out for all the stuff that we're playing around with.
Yeah. So have a good day. Peace out.
Thanks for hanging out, folks. Later.